Welcome back to Jackson County Building Zion. This time we'll be doing chapters 13 through 15. Chapter 13. Back in the days of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden was a celestial land, at least before they were cast out. It had to be celestial, otherwise Adam wouldn't have been able to walk and talk with God in the way that he did. Since the land was celestial, not only was Adam able to walk and talk with God, but also the land was able to grow all manner of vegetation. Thinking between these two attributes of a celestial land, one being able to talk with God and two being a fertile land, capable of growing all manner of vegetation, no doubt being able to walk and talk with God is the greatest benefit. However, do not discount the benefit of a fertile and special ground. The starving people of Africa or other parts of the world would see this ground as an absolute miracle, and it should be treated as such. This is why there's a text from Joseph Smith and the Brethren about the soil, geography, and topography of the land in Jackson County. When Joseph Smith was asked by God to start preparing the people to build up this city of Zion, a new Jerusalem, part of his task was to write down this description of the land, so that people would see the miracle and the special place that this land really was. Part of his description said, "During the late spring of 1859, we had the appreciated privilege of visiting the beautiful area of Adam-on-Diamond. This was one of the choice experiences of our lives. The weather was lovely. The spot is quite some distance from houses or people and has a serenity and peace about it which is difficult to describe. One senses instinctively, it seems, that here is a most sacred place. A few rods from the top of the hill, which overlooks the valley itself, stands the remains of a log cabin formerly owned by Lyman White, at one time a counselor to Joseph Smith. In the area, various kinds of trees, shrubs, flowers, and cactuses abound. Beneath the hill is nestled the most beautiful valley, completely surrounded by a rather dense fringe of trees and undergrowth. The valley itself is carefully cultivated and planted. There were formerly homes other than that of Lyman White in the immediate vicinity, but they are now uninhabited. It is as though the Lord has reserved this spot for the momentous events which are to take place there in the near future." Listening particularly to that last sentence, that God has reserved this place for momentous events that will take place in the future, seems so real now. The area really had been cared for and watched by God through his servants to make sure it would stay safe for those things that would need to occur there in the future. Getting the land closer to a celestial land was part of our mission on earth, and no doubt it should be made celestial. It makes you wonder how Adam will feel about the area when he returns. How far off are we really from that celestial mark? It was also interesting to see how the news of the temple hadn't brought more controversy and excitement to those outside of the church, but also those non-members didn't believe it was a New Jerusalem anyway. Then, with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints members, they just accepted it as fact that this is the area. When Joseph Smith was first attempting to get the city built, the people just couldn't and wouldn't live up to that celestial law that was needed, or at least not enough of the people could live up to the law. It's one of the reasons why it has taken so long for the city to be realized. There just haven't been enough faithful members ready and willing to live that celestial law on the earth yet. Now, looking out over all the people that are here helping on the project and living faithfully, it seems the time finally has come, and this city will be as that of the city of Enoch, a glorified city that will never be taken from the earth. After the earth is cleansed of all its sin and the wicked are destroyed, this city will be placed back on the earth where it will stay forever. Right now, the city feels like that of old in the Old Testament, where you could imagine prophets like Adam are near and performing miracles and talking with God. Not only that, but it was such a safe haven at that time. The revelation that was spoken about, the turmoil outside the city, had indeed started to come to pass. You wouldn't have known it years before, but the idea of the Jews going back to Israel may not have seemed like such a big deal to the whole world. But suddenly people were aligning on all sides of this issue. Not only that, but another main issue facing the world was that of marriage, how it should be termed, who it should be between, and what it really means. Because of the Jews' return to Israel and the concept of marriage being a part of everyone's religion, it was affecting everyone around the world, it seemed. The only safe place seemed to be in Jackson County. The strange thing about it was that no one was forced out. No one was told they needed to leave so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints could build up its new Jerusalem. People just accepted the fact that this was right and the city was to belong to the Mormons. Brett loved teaching the discussions again. They were so fresh in his head still, and he could see where they would eventually end up. But mostly, living that celestial law was wonderful. The toils and cares of the world seemed so small and petty. If only people knew the wonderful peace that comes from living this law. Back home, our family was facing a new problem, and it started somewhere around Father's Day. Mr. Michelson was missing Savannah more than ever. She was her only daughter, and Father's Day was usually a whole family deal. In the past, Savannah and Miss Michelson would spend weeks thinking of what to do for Mr. Michelson. They loved him so much, and every year they would try to top themselves. One year, Mr. Michelson had come home from the store getting ready to make pot roast for dinner. Instead, he entered the dining room. He saw lit candles on the table. Everything looked perfect and was done. Of course, they had enough food to make roast the next week, but what was most surprising was that Mr. Michelson had learned his wife could cook as well as he could. Mom, realizing that Mr. Michelson may be feeling down, decided to go pay him a visit to try and cheer him up on his lonely Father's Day. Mom made some of her homemade banana bread, which she learned was a favorite of Mr. Michelson's. Then off she went to his home. After knocking on the door and seeing Mr. Michelson answer, Mom could tell he was putting up a brave front. She could see that she wasn't wanted, but she was sure if she stayed for a while and tried to talk things out with him, that things would be fine. Once they were seated in the front living room after Mom insisted they visit, that's when the tension really began. "So have you heard anything from Savannah yet?" Mr. Michelson paused, not really wanting to talk about it, but he knew he needed to say something to make Mom go away. "She did call me once, just to tell me she was okay, but that was weeks ago." "Oh, I'm so sorry. We've all been praying that she stays safe." Mr. Michelson only scoffed. Prayer, what good would that do? Mr. Michelson thought, "Well, I appreciate your efforts, and thank you for the banana bread." Mom could see that she was being forced out of the home, but she didn't want to leave with emotions like this. I don't know if you knew this, but my husband can give you a priesthood blessing if you like." Mom looked at Mr. Michelson's face, trying to judge how this news hit him. "And what does this blessing entail exactly?" "Well, my husband anoints your head with some oil, and then placing his hands on your head, he says a blessing." "And then what happens?" "Well, according to your faith, most anything you need can happen. It's all based on your faith." "My faith in what? Because I don't believe in your church." Mom could see things were getting worse. Maybe there was a hidden problem here. "Yes, I know that. It's based on your faith in God." "Oh, I see. Now, is that your God?" "Well, he's everyone's God." Mr. Michelson was really getting tired of this and just wanted to spend his lonely, miserable day by himself. But mostly he wanted this mother with her happy little family out of his life. "Look, thank you for what you've done, and really, if I need anything, I'll call, okay?" Mom decided to take a chance. "Is there something that I've done to offend you? If so, I really am sorry." Mr. Michelson took a moment, shocked that Mom didn't realize what she had done. Before Savannah met Brett, she was doing just fine. And now because of him, and that religion of yours, Savannah's gone, and there's nothing that I can do to bring her back. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like you to leave." Mom did leave as was requested of her, but the hurt she felt was just not going away. She had tried to do a good deed, and she wished that she could explain things better, but she couldn't. Mr. Michelson would never accept the fact that Brett was a good influence on Savannah, and that the church was only there to help anyone. Once she got back home, after driving that dusty road that hot Sunday afternoon, her face was full of tears. Dad was seated at the dinner table, reading scriptures and highlighting. Without even looking up, he knew, just by the feeling in the home, that things didn't go well. Mom, being the tough woman that she is, decided to try and tough it up and go to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Her strong, worn-out hands were busily peeling potatoes as her husband walked over to put his arm around her. Just from the touch of his hand on her shoulder, Mom began to cry harder again. "Do you want to talk about it?" I just don't get it," Mom sobbed. "What?" "I don't understand why he hates us, and Brett so much." "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. I take it the visit didn't go as planned, huh?" What am I supposed to do? Apologize for Brett being a good example to Savannah? Apologize for us treating her like another daughter and giving her a good place to go? I know, dear. We just have to persevere. Think of all the good things going on right now. I mean, Brett is actually helping to build the New Jerusalem. Doesn't that just knock your socks off every time you think of it? The truth was that knowing what Brett was doing was wonderful, but it was hard having him away. Well, Mom knew none of this trouble with Savannah would be happening if you were home. Of course, Brett was doing the right thing, but somehow Mom just wanted to be able to drive out and just find Savannah. That way things would be better between their families. The small, dingy two-bedroom apartment that Cindy and Donna were staying in with Savannah seemed to become more of a dangerous place to live. Just down the street, there was a nice Jewish family that had their home vandalized just the day before. The family fortunately wasn't at home at the time, but seeing all those people and the police going in and out of the home made Savannah long for a better place. Her mind was kind of all over the place. It was a Sunday night. Savannah was doing her best to fall asleep on the couch while Donna and Cindy lay in their rooms in a drunken sleep. She was doing good so far at not drinking with them, but she was finding it hard to stay out of the riots they were going to. Donna and Cindy actually were happy when they learned about the vandalized home down the street. Savannah almost wondered if they had something to do with it. She tried to go out and do things on her own as much as she could so she could stay out of trouble. But laying there in the dark in that bad apartment, Savannah knew she wouldn't last too much longer. It was such a terrible feeling of not belonging that Savannah was feeling. She certainly didn't have good feelings towards the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at the time. Most definitely she hated her home and her parents, but now these old yet new friends of hers were starting to feel wrong as well. She really wondered what was wrong with the world. Where in the whole messed up, tumultuous place could she find peace and know that everything would be all right? Chapter 14. Those first hot summer days in Jackson County felt like those of the early church years as Brett continued his work with the members. He would think constantly of those pioneers and saints of old that gave up everything they had for the cause of building one of the Lord's temples. He would often wonder what was the overall drive pushing them to do all of this. One answer he would come up most often was that Joseph Smith once told them that the church would fill the whole earth one day. Perhaps the saints knew then that the work and the building of the Lord's temples had to start somewhere. They knew those saving ordinances were necessary and vital to the lives of every Latter-day Saint, and so they would work and pray every day as they went about their work. The people in Jackson County by this time were mostly those engaged in the work. There still were, however, those people going about protesting. There were still other people of other faiths still not ready to leave their homes. They could see the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was undertaking a great task, and they were surprised by the change their world was taking. It was much like those who lived in the South after the Civil War. The idea of gallantry and the Southern way of life, of gentlemen courting those beautiful Southern belles, had died when the South had lost the war. It was a new world, and for some it took some time for them to realize it wasn't their world anymore. They didn't belong somehow, but if they didn't belong, what should they do? After working another long day in the service of the Lord, Brett was glad for a Saturday. He had spent the day writing to friends and calling family. It was somewhat distressing for Brett to hear of our family's problems with the Michelsons, and with the fights and riots going on everywhere concerning the Jews returning, and the issues surrounding marriage. This did not surprise him, however, and when he was able to tell us of his spiritual experiences and of the hope for the future, it seemed to somehow wash our fears away for the moment. It also seemed so odd how much he was swallowed up in the work already. He could feel inside that he should be more worried about Savannah, but because of his focus on the work and living that celestial law, there just wasn't room enough to worry so much anymore. After the phone calls and the writing, Brett had spent the day discovering more of the town with his roommates. The brotherhood among the saints and the feeling it brought was unlike that of any other feeling on earth. Just being out among those who were working for the Lord and striving to build up the city of Zion caused the Spirit to come into their lives even more each day. Brett had fallen asleep fairly early that Saturday night. After the long work week and the great P-Day, Brett was ready for some rest. Somewhere around 4 a.m., Brett had awoken. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or if something else was nagging him. The soft deepness of his pillows and the light comfort of his sheets was beckoning for him to stay in bed. However, the force pulling him out was stronger. Taking his journal to the living room, Brett sat in the corner of the burgundy leather sofa, writing down some of the thoughts he was feeling. July 7th. Thinking back on those early days of my mission, I remember that feeling of being in the honeymoon phase. I'd gone into the MTC thinking I would land in a culture shock, and that I would need to do a lot of adjusting. I'd found instead that I fit right in from the first day. I felt so confident that I assumed a leader-like position among those who shared my room. When they would feel lost or unsure as what they should do, I would help them. It seemed I was on a spiritual high for about 3 months. It was once I landed in the field in Iraq that the feeling changed. I was out of the honeymoon stage and into the reality stage by then. I finally realized where I was and what I was about to undertake. That's when the mission really started to be hard. It was a time when I really had to decide if I could do this or not. I persevered, of course, but it was a difficult time. I'm starting to wonder when that reality check period will come here for me. I'm starting to wonder just how long this spiritual high will last. Of course, this is different from a regular mission. I am able to call home whenever I like, and I'm not out teaching in such a dangerous area. The rules and guidelines I'm living aren't too different. There's that higher degree of spirituality that is coming from living this celestial law, and maybe that's what's causing this spiritual high to last. The work has been so great and so spiritual thus far. The discussions and work that they asked me to do with each of the members was at first overwhelming. Learning what I'd have to do for each one made me think this project would take forever. But there's also that feeling of ease that comes when I'm engaged in the work. I'm trying to picture how this land will be when we're finished. I try to imagine what Jerusalem was like in the times of Christ, when he was preaching and laying the foundations of the church. This time, however, the world would know and recognize fully who he is, and the Spirit would abound and be plentiful. I think about what needs to be done before he can return in power and great glory. Of course, the city of Zion needs to be built, but more than that, the people need to be ready. There's a vast majority of people ready to live the celestial law here, but it's not full, it's not complete. Still, I can imagine Joseph Smith looking down on us, smiling at the saints' ability to follow this law. When he first tried to get the saints to live this law, they struggled. They just couldn't reach that mark. At least, there weren't enough saints living it. Now here we are, after years and years of growing and overcoming obstacles, after being forced from our homes and forced to move west. The descendants of pioneers are back, and we're reclaiming this land that was once in the hands of our enemies. I'm so lucky and feel so blessed to be a part of this. I'm still not sure why the Lord picked me of all people to help with this, but I do know that his ways are not my ways, and he knows my potential and what's best for me. I will keep striving to do my best and do my part to help build this great city. After writing his journal entry, Brett was still awake, burning with the Spirit. His mind was so full of thoughts and worries that he knew he'd never be able to get back to sleep. Walking back to his room for a blanket, Brett grabbed his scriptures from off the nightstand. Once back on the leather sofa, Brett flipped open his scriptures to the account of Enoch and the people of this city. Turning to Moses chapter 6, Brett read where the Lord was speaking to Enoch. He said, "Say unto this people, choose ye this day to serve the Lord God who made you. Behold, my spirit is upon you, wherefore all thy words will I justify, and the mountains shall flee before you, and the rivers shall turn from their course, and thou shalt abide in me, and I in you, therefore walk with me." Brett read about Enoch being slow of speech, but then being magnified in his calling by the Lord. Enoch was able to do many great things by the Spirit, teaching his people those things they should do. The people were so righteous that they were taken up into heaven. It was near the end of his study of the people of Enoch that Brett felt the prompting from the Spirit. It was a small feeling and impression, but Brett had learned through many experiences to never ignore those impressions. It was that still small voice that seemed to whisper to Brett to kneel and pray for Savannah. After his prayer, he also would need to fast for her that day. Kneeling down, Brett didn't know what he was supposed to say at first. For the moment, he knelt there quietly thinking until the words started to come. "Dear Father in heaven, I come before you at this time, at the beginning of this fast, to pray for thy help for one of thy chosen daughters. I know thou knowest the needs of all thy children, and thou knowest what is best for all thy children. I pray that thou might look after Savannah and guide her into safe paths that will lead her closer unto thee. Bless her family at this time also, that they may be comforted and know of her safety. Help them to understand those things that Savannah must do. I pray that thou might touch her heart with thy Spirit, that she may have that witness in her heart of the truth of the Book of Mormon and of the gospel. Bless her with the desire to be baptized in thy church. I thank thee for all thou hast done for her, and for the blessing she has been in my life as well as the lives of others. I pray for these things and ask them in faith which I have in thee, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. It was now 6:30. Brett's roommates were just getting out of bed. What a wonderful spiritual start to this beautiful July Fast Sunday. Waking with a start that Sunday morning, Savannah was starting to realize that maybe she hadn't dreamt what had gone on the night before. She'd come back to the apartment after a day of searching for a job and a different place to live to find Donna and Cassidy in one of their classic fights. The fight, of course, was about Savannah. They had started fighting about her a few weeks earlier, and it just seemed to get more and more heated. Cassidy, who has known Savannah for a long time and has been her friend, was on the defensive for her. Donna was starting to get fed up with how long Savannah was staying with them. Because she was so tired after the stress of trying to plan her next move, she lay down on the brown soft couch and started to drift off to sleep. In the rooms down the hall, she could still hear the fights going on, only Savannah had thought it was a dream. Donna was yelling at Cassidy, calling her a coward and threatening that she would leave soon if Savannah did not. Cassidy had done her part, and it was time for her to make her friend leave and stop mooching. Cassidy would yell right back that it wasn't Donna's place to say anything, and that if Savannah wanted to, she could stay as long as she wanted. It was that Sunday morning when Savannah awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of light sobs that she realized it hadn't been a dream. Cassidy was hunched over a steaming white mug of coffee, wearing her light scarlet silk robe, hand on her forehead, holding up her mess of hair, crying softly into her mug. The light of day was seeping through the living room window, giving light to the mess and fight that had happened last night. Folding up her white fluffy quilt and placing it on the back of the couch, Savannah tried to think of something she could say to Cassidy in the way of comfort. Grabbing the green mug from the cupboard, Savannah poured herself some of the warm yet bitter coffee and sat down on the high bar stool next to Cassidy. For the moment, Cassidy sat silently sobbing into her mug. Savannah didn't know what to say, so she merely rested her arm on Cassidy's shoulders, rubbing them in comfort. Savannah hadn't realized Cassidy was such a good friend to her, sticking up for her like that. She felt she hardly knew Cassidy, but either way she was glad for a friend like her. Even though it was this way, she still knew she needed to get out on her own and find where she had belonged. "Do you want to talk about it?" Savannah finally spoke, breaking the morning silence. "I just can't believe she's gone," Cassidy spoke, seemingly to no one. "Donna? She moved out?" Savannah guessed. "She's been part of my life for so long, and now because of some silly fight, she's gone?" Savannah continued to rub Cassidy's shoulders as she sipped on her coffee. "Thank you for standing up for me," Savannah said genuinely. Cassidy merely shrugged her shoulders, not knowing how to accept the praise. Savannah continued on. "You know, she didn't need to leave like that. I mean, I've been looking for a job and a different place to stay for a while now. It's only a matter of time before I'd be out of your hair." "No, Savannah, you should take all the time you need. It's not up to Donna alone how long you stay here." "Well, thank you again for sticking up for me like that." Cassidy's tears seemed to have ceased and her mood had been lifted, at least momentarily. Savannah finished her coffee and went to the sink to rinse out her mug. The cold tile floor of the kitchen felt good on her feet after that warm coffee. She'd forgotten how much she missed it when she used to drink it with her parents. Standing there in her green and pink cotton shorts and white tank top, Savannah felt Cassidy's arm go around her from the back, hugging her. "You know, you've been a really good friend to me," Cassidy said genuinely. Patting Cassidy's hand that rested on her stomach, Savannah started to feel awkward, but she wasn't sure why. Turning around, Cassidy's face was almost too close to hers. It was a quick, almost spur-of-the-moment action when Cassidy leaned in and kissed Savannah lightly on the lips. She seemed to be testing the waters to see if it was okay with Savannah. Looking back at Cassidy, trying not to show her alarm and disgust, Savannah gave off the look that this needed to stop. Cassidy, on the other hand, was feeling low, and her girlfriend had left her. In her mind, Savannah was going to be her comfort to help her get over the loss. Savannah, on the other hand, was not going to continue with this, so instead of making the situation feel even more awkward, she walked away and grabbed some clothes as she headed to the bathroom to shower. With the door locked and the warm water flowing over her body, Savannah started to think more clearly. She knew she needed to get out of there as quick as possible. She had come to understand Cassidy's new personality over the last couple weeks she'd been staying there. She knew things with Cassidy would only lead to a place she was not ever willing to go. She also knew that Cassidy wasn't one to give up easily, and she would continue to try to develop that relationship with Savannah the longer she stayed there. Once she was done showering, she made up her mind as to what she should do. She had lived in this den of sin long enough, and she wasn't willing to stay there any longer. An idea seemed to fill her mind the longer she thought about it. She was going back to Wyoming, but not to her parents. She would come to our home, but only if we promised not to tell her parents where she was. So as soon as she was done showering, she'd wait for Cassidy to go to work, and then she'd start packing. Chapter 15. As the sun started to set and fill the sky with a pink glow, Brett, Kelson, and Molino started walking toward the chapel for another great Sunday night devotional. There were so many great members involved in this work, so there had been many great speakers and many great devotionals. Brett had told us about listening to the prophet and his counselors and many other members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Each devotional was so spiritually moving that Brett and his roommates found it impossible not to cry at each one. Tonight's would be another great moving devotional as Bishop Merrill Snow was giving it. Since the project began, Bishop Snow became somewhat of a celebrity among the members. It was largely through him that the Lord worked to make this project possible now. Not only did this make him popular, but his jolly Santa-like quality made him beloved by all that met him. So it wasn't unusual that the chapel was almost full to capacity by the time Brett and his roommates got there. Sitting in one of the overflow rooms watching the proceedings on television, Brett had his journal out, ready to take copious notes of what he believed would be a wonderful devotional. The opening hymn, which was Hope of Israel, already created a wonderful spiritual atmosphere, so when Bishop Snow got up with tears in his eyes already, Brett knew this would be a night he would never forget. My dear beloved brothers and sisters, as I look out among your bright, wonderful faces, I cannot help but shed tears of joy and happiness at the changes I have seen in you and many members around the world. Bishop Snow paused to wipe tears from his eyes and collect himself before he went on. The hymn we've just sung, I think, sums up my entire talk. I think we could just go home now. The audience laughed as Bishop Snow gave one of his famous smiles. As I've watched this work go forth through my many years, I've seen many wonderful, beautiful temples and many other edifices dedicated to the Lord. Their architecture, their beauty and majesty is unmatched anywhere in the world. However, through all of its beauty and wonder, everything we do, all the work we put into building God's kingdom here on earth, comes down to people. I'm reminded of the Tower of Babel. Because of their love of God and their longing to be close to Him, they built a tower, bigger than any other on earth. They put so much energy into trying to build closer to heaven that they didn't realize the Spirit of God could be with them if only they would strive for it. Although our church is grand in numbers, there are still many, many people without the knowledge of the gospel. For them, they don't know where to look or what to do so that they may have the Spirit of God with them always. I hope that we can always remember that we aren't only building the kingdom of God physically here on earth, but more importantly, we're striving to build it spiritually. You have all been called as workers for this great temple project. I do not wish to put one calling above another, but always remember the importance of building up the people's spirits. We may be able to build the most beautiful building on earth here, but without the proper spirit, God will not abide here. I wish to share with you a personal story, if I may. When I was a young man, I was called to serve in Rome, Italy mission. After receiving the call, I thought of President Heber J. Grant and how hard his mission to Italy was on him. The people were hard and rough, and I worried that I might have a similar experience. The temple had not been built yet. It wouldn't be there for another few years. There was one family in particular that I remember working with. They were Roman Catholic, and they loved taking me and my companion around showing us the beautiful buildings of Rome. I loved looking at them and marveling on their craftsmanship. When we would go inside, however, I would always feel a little let down. Yes, the building was marvelous, but without the spirit inside, it just left me unfulfilled. One day, my companion and I had decided to take this family on a tour of our own. We wanted to take them to our chapels. They are beautiful, but not in the same way that the Roman Catholic buildings are. It was a warm, beautiful day, and the family was in great spirits. When we got to the first chapel, the father didn't seem very impressed. We hoped that once inside he would feel the Spirit and would find that thing that was missing from the buildings. He did not feel it, however. We went to many of our chapels that day, and it just didn't seem to be working. Finally, when we got to the last chapel, we decided that we needed to bear our testimony to this family, with the help and guidance of the Spirit. Once inside, the family was not impressed once again, but as my companion got to the pulpit and asked the family to sit down, the room seemed to change. His testimony was one I wish I had written down, because after these many years I wish I had remembered it, because when I looked over, I saw tears in the father's eyes. He was finally feeling the Spirit. Later, when he bore his testimony to me, he mentioned how he didn't realize what was missing from those other buildings until he had felt the Spirit. That is the message I want you to spread to others. That is the message of the Lord would have you teach. Without the Spirit of the Lord, the temple is just another building. It is interesting to note that the temple is often referred to as the mountain of the Lord in the Scriptures. The word for mountain can also be translated as a hidden place. When non-members drive past our temples, they do see them, but ask yourself this question: do they really see them for what they are? The purpose and spirit of the temple is hidden to them. It is only through teaching and sharing your testimony that it becomes visible to them. Bishop Snow went on, talking more about mission stories and the Spirit. It was such a wonderful devotional. Brett and his companions had taken many notes. They'd for sure tell their families of this experience as soon as they could. The Spirit was so strong, and of course many were crying. It had been an interesting morning for Savannah. After the strange experience with Cassidy, she was glad to be out of that house. Once Cassidy had left, Savannah had plenty of time to pack up her things and hit the road back to Wyoming. It would be a long drive with plenty for her to think about as she drove, but at least she would be going someplace where she was loved. That was the way Savannah felt about us. Even though it seemed we had made things complicated with her and her parents, she couldn't really blame us. She figured it was probably more her parents' fault for not understanding. The nice thing was that Savannah felt so at home with us she couldn't wait to be taken in by our family. She only hoped that we would understand her situation. She hoped that we wouldn't tell her parents where she was. We could tell them that we knew she was okay, but that was all. She wasn't for sure if it would work, but she was hoping and praying that things would work out right. When she started her drive that day, she had in her mind that she would keep on driving until she got to our house. But of course that would be many hours of driving, and she would need to sleep at least once during this drive. The only problem was that she barely had enough money for gas to make it back, let alone money to stay someplace. She didn't even have money for food, which is why she packed quite a bit from Cassidy's. The bright July afternoon sun rested on her arm as she drove along the highway, with her window down and music blaring. She was doing her best to forget the past and look to the future. She was so anxious to get home that she would keep on driving until she needed a full tank of gas. It was during one of these stops that the day started to get stranger. She had pulled into a Phillips 66, got out, and started to fill her car when she heard her name being called. "Savannah? What the heck are you doing way out here?" Turning around, Savannah could not believe it was Donna calling her name. Who would have thought that both of them would leave Cassidy and go the same way and end up at this same gas station? She knew that Donna didn't like her very much, so she was worried about what was going to happen. "I'm actually heading back home. I figured I wore out my welcome by now," Savannah tried to say jokingly. "Yeah, you want to tell me the truth now?" "What do you mean?" "Come on, I know you hate your parents. I've heard you talk about it. There's no way you're going back home to them." "Well, where are you going?" Savannah said, trying to change the subject. "I don't know, but we were talking about you, so where are you really headed?" "I'm going to stay with a family friend back in Wyoming, the Larsons." "As in Brett's parents?" Donna said, surprised. "Yeah, why? Is that so shocking?" "Well, they're Mormon like their son, aren't they?" "Well, yeah." "Well, I thought you hated that church right now." Savannah didn't want to have this conversation. It was far too complicated to try and explain. Still, something seemed to be urging her along. "I don't hate the church, Donna. It just that it seems to have complicated my life, that's all." "So why go back and stay with these people then?" Savannah tried to think of how to explain it. She struggled with it herself, and she just knew it was right. "They're wonderful people, Donna. The nicest people I know. I don't know how to explain it other than it just feels right." Donna looked back at Savannah, confused by what she'd just heard. She simply waved goodbye, and off she drove. Savannah knew what was going to happen with Donna and Cassidy. Although she didn't really care for their lifestyle choices, she had spent some time with them, and they really weren't bad people, just a little misguided. So Savannah could relate. Before long, Savannah was back on the road, and she was covering more miles as the day pressed on. Very soon it was getting dark, and Savannah was getting tired. She decided to just pull over in this open field where the air was crisp and the stars were almost as bright as back home. Once she was parked and laying back in her seat with her window cracked open just a bit for air, Savannah stared up at the stars. Her mind took her back to that first date she had with Brett, when he took her out and showed her the stars. Looking up at them, she suddenly felt very lonely, and maybe a part of her did start to miss Brett, and she was wondering what he was doing that very moment.